Good evening, everybody. We're glad to see you tonight. Thanks for being here. We're studying about the return of the children of Israel, or actually not Israel. We're talking about the return of the people of Judah from captivity. They were taken captive by the Babylonians, but they were sent home by the Persians. We remember that the Babylonian Empire was conquered by the Medo-Persian Empire while Judah was in captivity. And so it was a Persian king, Cyrus, who authorized Judah to go home, go back to Jerusalem, and rebuild a temple there. I have sort of regretted the title that this worksheet author used, Israel Goes Home, because we know Israel is the name that was associated with the northern kingdom. After the kingdom divided, northern kingdom was Israel, southern kingdom was Judah. And so Israel never came back from their Assyrian captivity, certainly did not come back as a collective whole. What we're really studying about is Judah returning from captivity. And of course the historic books that cover that are the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. We mentioned last week that the events that we study in the neat little short story Ezra in our Old Testaments, the events that took place that are recorded in the book of Esther happened in about this same time frame as well. All right, so if you're looking at your study sheet, we're on the lesson that is actually titled Lesson 10, because I skipped over some of the lessons. I've been selective about which of these lessons we used. So your lesson will actually be identified as Lesson 10, although we're not on 10. This is not our 10th week. But if you don't have the lesson sheet, turn to Ezra chapters 5 and 6. That's where our lesson will be tonight. Ezra chapters 5 and 6. When we ended up last week at the end of chapter 4, remember, because there had been opposition, the people in the land, the people that we would in the New Testament know as the Samaritans, the people who had been transplanted in there by the Assyrians, they objected to Jerusalem being rebuilt and the temple being reestablished, and they sent a letter to the Persian king and said, these are a troublemaking people. They always have been. If you check your records, you'll find out that they have always been a rebellious people. And they're trying to rebuild Jerusalem. And if they accomplish that, we're telling you there'll be trouble, and it will cost the king money because they won't pay tribute, and they'll be opposing what the king wants to do, and you should put a stop to this. And so the Persian king did a review of the history and found, the fact of the matter is, these Jews have been a troublemaking people. I want that temple stopped. I want them to stop construction. And so they did. At the end of chapter 4, then ceased the work of the house of God, which is at Jerusalem. So it ceased until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And so the initial opposition succeeded, and they were forced to, I say they were forced to stop, at least they complied with an order to stop building the temple in Jerusalem. And so we think that it probably sort of lay dormant. They had set the foundations, but they hadn't done much else, but the job lay dormant for about 20 years. And it took a couple of prophets of God coming to stimulate the people into action. The first question is, who were the prophets who came to speak to the people, and who did they get motivated? Look at chapter 5, verse 1. Then the prophets Haggai and the prophet, then the prophets Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo prophesied unto the Jews that were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of God of Israel, even unto them. Then rose up Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Jeshua the son of Josedek, and began to build the house of God which is at Jerusalem, and with them were the prophets of God helping them. It doesn't seem like there was any official order, okay, you can start again. They just, because of the urging of these prophets, they started up even though they were still under that stop work order that had been issued about 20 years earlier. But Haggai and Zechariah got them motivated to go to work. Let's go over, just briefly, in the book of Haggai. In Haggai chapter 1, notice what Haggai was really straight with them about how they had laid out. Haggai chapter 1, verse 1, in the second year of Darius the king, and that harmonizes exactly with chapter 5, verse 1, in time frame. So in the second year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, in the first day of the month, came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet unto Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and the governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, saying, Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, the people say, the time has not come, the time that the Lord's house should be built. Then came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house lie waste? Now therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Ye have sown much and bring in little. Ye eat, but ye have not enough. Ye drink, but ye are not filled with drink. Ye clothe you, but there is none warm. And he that earneth wages to put into a bag with holes. Thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Go up to the mountain and bring wood and build the house, and I will take pleasure in it, and I will be glorified, saith the Lord. And so you'd have to say that Haggai got right with them. I think that's the way we would express it in our time. And I especially like that expression. Is it time? You say it's not time. It's not the right time. It's not a good time to be building the house. Is it a good time for you to be fixing up your own houses? That expression, a sealed house, means a house with a ceiling in it. And that would not have necessarily been common in that time. They would have had more crude structures. But they'd had time now to fix up their own houses and make them very fine. You say it's not time to build the Lord's house, but it is a good time to build your own houses. And the famous expression of Haggai was, consider your ways. And he points out that things hadn't really been going really great for them. They had been planting a lot, but not harvesting much. Things just didn't seem to be going well for them. And Haggai, now, by inspiration, Haggai is saying that the reason for that is that God is not blessing your work because you have not faithfully done His work. That's a little... Kelly?
I've got a twofold question.
Okay.
One, would they have been wrong to, in a sense, ignore the king's decree at the beginning and just keep building? And two, is there an application for us in regards to...
Yeah, I don't know if you could hear Kelly's question. So when the order initially came down 20 years previous, would they have been right to ignore that order and keep right on building? And I think the answer to that, I would say the answer to that would be yes, because it was God's will that the house be built. And what if the government told us you can't worship on Sunday? Well, we should go ahead and worship because it's God's will. And the principle of Acts 5:29, we ought to obey God rather than men. So I would argue, they should have gone on and built the house. It was God's plan. He had prophesied it way before that they would be authorized to go back and build the house. So I do think there's a principle there that we should apply and need to be ready to apply. If the government orders us to do something that's a violation of God's will, we ought to do God's will. Wayne?
And Haggai says, why aren't you prospering?
Yeah.
Because you're not doing what you need to be doing with the temple.
Yeah.
So they should have been building the temple. He makes it clear to them that they are not doing well because they haven't been building the temple.
Exactly right. There's a little bit of a catch to this argument. So my car breaks down and the transmission goes out. Simultaneously, the washing machine springs a leak, and a tree falls on top of the roof of my house. And I said, God must really be angry with me. Well, people reason that way. I don't think we can reason that way because we don't have inspiration. We don't have revelation. But we know in this case, because of what Haggai said, it exactly was the problem. The reason why they weren't prospering and things weren't going well with them is because God was holding back his blessings because they had not done what he wanted them to do. So in this case, we can say so definitely because we have the proof of inspired revelation. Whereas when that tree fell on my house, I can't say, uh-oh, I better figure out what's wrong, why God's mad at me. I can't do that because I don't have divine inspiration. But they did, and Haggai proved it. Thoughts or comments, anybody? All right. So, on Sunday evening, Josh preached a lesson to us about telling people they are wrong. And he made the point, people usually don't like to be told they're wrong. You want to make somebody mad, about the quickest way you can do that is tell them that they're wrong. Haggai had told them they're wrong. But I think it's interesting that Zerubbabel and Jeshua took it the right way. In verse 2, they rose up. Then rose up Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Jeshua the son of Jehozadak and began to build the house of God which is at Jerusalem. And with them were the prophets of God helping them. So these two men, I think, are commendable in the sense that they didn't get defensive and they didn't say, Haggai, what do you know about it? You don't know the trouble we've been facing. You don't know the issues we've been dealing with. You just get out of here and leave us alone. You don't have any input in this business. They could have done that. Lots of people would have done that, but they accepted the admonition and went to work. So I think you have to commend them for a favorable reaction to some pretty strong words of rebuke that Haggai had issued. We don't have them recorded here in our text in Ezra, but we have them over there in the book of Haggai, what Haggai said to them. And, it would have been easy for them to sort of have, they got their toes stepped on, and so they're going to react negatively, but they didn't to their commendation. Anybody else see anything there? Okay. So, as is typically the case, the opponents of God don't give up easily. Our author credited Satan, and ultimately all the opposition to God, if you back it up far enough, lays at the feet of Satan for opposing God. But literally, the physical opponents of the Jews weren't going to give up that easily. So notice in verse 3, at the same time came to them Tatnai, governor on this side of the river, and Shetharboznai and their companions, and said thus unto them, Who hath commanded you to build this house and to make up this wall? Then we said to them after this manner, What are the names of the men that make this building? So the people who had originally objected are not done objecting, and so they come to him and say, wait a minute, who told you could start building this temple again? Who could build this wall? Now, I looked at a couple of different versions, a couple of different printings of the King James Version, and they weren't the same. But this version that I'm reading from doesn't make any sense in verse 4. So they ask, Who hath commanded you to build this house and to make up this wall? Then said we unto them after this manner, What are the names of the men that make this building? I don't know. When I read that way, it doesn't make any sense. So I looked at the English Standard Version says, They ask, What are the names of the men who are building this building? The New American Standard Version said, Then we told them the names of the men who were building this building. And either one of those makes better sense. As I was reading the King James Version, that doesn't make sense. But I read a different printing of the King James, and that was actually changed. So I was surprised to find a difference. But anyway, they came and said, What are you all doing here? This is a stop order on this job. And who has authorized you to get started again? And by the way, we're taking down names here. What's your name? What's your name? What's your name? Give us your names. You guys who are involved in this, tell us your names. We're going to report you. What would be your reaction to that? Now, again, this sort of goes to the question that Kelly asked about governmental opposition and persecution. What if, okay, it's so hard to imagine. This is so hard to imagine. But what if Sunday morning we come to church Sunday morning, and there are soldiers out there with rifles, and they're telling us we can't come in the building to worship God. And what are you going to do if they say that? Are you going to say, hey, listen, we're going to worship God no matter what? And the soldier says, what's your name? We're writing down names. We're going to report you. Give me your name. Give me your name. How would we react to that? Well, I hope we would react as we should, and that is that we would be faithful no matter what. But we've never been tested like that, have we? We have never been tested at that level. In fact, it's so foreign to us that we can't hardly even imagine facing that kind of opposition. But what if it happened? What would we do? I think we should pray on a consistent basis that if such things would happen, if we were opposed, that we would be faithful no matter what. I know Monty often says, what's the worst thing they could do to you? Kill you and you can go to heaven. and that's, of course, that's the eternal perspective we need to have. But it's a little bit hard when you're facing the barrel of a gun, right? So what would we do? These people are being put to a really severe test right here. Who told you could do this? Give me your name. I want to know who are you? What's your name? We're going to report you. Pretty strong opposition, you got to admit. Any thoughts here? Anybody? All right. Okay. You know, there are alternatives. So if they said we couldn't come in this building, we could go someplace else and meet. We wouldn't necessarily have to, insist to come into this physical place. But if they tried to stop us from worshiping altogether, we've got to worship no matter what. All right. So notice how they responded. In verse 5, it says, the eye of their God was upon the elders of the Jews, that they could not cause them to cease, till the matter came to Darius, and then they returned answer by letter concerning this matter. Now, so that threat did not dissuade them. It didn't stop them. It didn't make the work cease. Skip down to verse 11, and you can actually, so they wrote themselves, they wrote a letter. Verse 11. So hang on to that for a minute, just so we don't get completely out of whack here. So we'll see their letter in just a minute. But the people who were trying to get them to stop, notice what they did. So they wrote another letter. The copy of the letter that Tatnai, the governor of this side of the river, and Shetharboznai, that's not how you say that, Shetharboznai, and his companions, the Apharsachites, I don't know about that, which were on this side of the river, sent to Darius the king. So the opponents, they're going to compose a letter. And they're going to write to Darius, again, trying to get this work stopped. They sent a letter to him wherein was written thus, unto Darius the king, all peace. Be it known unto the king that we went to the province of Judea, to the house of the great God, which is builded with great stones, and timber is laid in the walls, and this work goeth fast on, and prosperous in their hands. Then we asked those elders, and said unto them, who commanded you to build this house, and to make up these walls? We asked their names also, to certify thee, that we might write the names of the men that were the chief of them. And so they're sending another letter back to the king to try and get this work stopped. Well, when they ask the Jews, what are your names and what are you doing? Verse 11, and thus they returned us answers, saying, we are the servants of the God of the heaven and earth, and build the house that was builded these many years ago, which a great king of Israel builded and set up. But after that our fathers had provoked God of heaven unto wrath, he gave them to the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the Chaldean, who destroyed this house and carried the people away into Babylon. But in the first year of Cyrus, the king of Babylon, the same King Cyrus made a decree to build this house of God. And the vessels also of gold and silver of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple that was in Jerusalem, brought them into the temple in Babylon. Those did Cyrus the king take out of the temple of Babylon, and they were delivered unto one whose name is Sheshbazzar, whom he made governor, and said unto him, Take these vessels, go carry them to the temple that is in Jerusalem, and let the house of God be builded in this way. Then came the same Sheshbazzar and laid the foundation of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem, and since that time even until now hath it been building, and yet it is not finished. So, you know, they apparently sent the list of names. They got the names. They asked for the names, and elders gave their names and told what they were doing. And so all of that was recorded and sent to the king, the Persian king, Darius. And here's what they want done. Verse 17. Now therefore, if it seem good to the king. Now again, these are the opponents who are writing this letter and reporting this work and reporting the names of the ones who are doing this work. Now therefore, if it seem good to the king, let there be a search made in the king's treasure house, which is there at Babylon, whether it be so, that a decree was made of Cyrus the king to build this house of God at Jerusalem. And let the king send his pleasure to us concerning this matter. All right, so I think that's all pretty straightforward, what's taking place here. So if you want to just sort of summarize that, when they got started under the provocation of Haggai and Zechariah, and they got started again building the temple, the opponents who wanted it stopped came and said, who told you could do this? We thought this work wasn't supposed to be taking place. And by the way, give us your names. And so the elders reported what they were doing and why they were doing it, and gave their names. And they mentioned, we really have authority dating back to Cyrus. More than 20 years ago, Cyrus, king of Persia, authorized us to build this temple. He even gave us certain of the vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had taken as spoil when the original temple was destroyed. He gave us some of those vessels, some of those ornamentations of the temple, and told us to take them back and build the temple. So they say that's what they told us. That's what they're claiming, that they have authority, that their authority dates all the way back to Cyrus. We would suggest that you do a search of the archives to find out if what they're claiming is true. And you have to believe they're thinking, that's not true. They're making that up. And as soon as a simple search of the archives takes place, it'll be proven that these people are in the wrong, and we'll put an end to this building of this temple. I'm sure that that's what they imagined would be the case. It's interesting that way back then, and we're talking about, this history is more than 500 years before Christ. This is a little over 500 years before the first century, 535 BC, that time frame. It's interesting to me that there was so much emphasis on making histories of the kings and archiving their edicts and their orders and so forth. We probably wouldn't think that 2,500 years ago that people would have been that diligent to do so, but they were. And providentially, this order to rebuild the temple had been recorded, and so they did the search. Again, the work had apparently been ceased for about 20 years, but notice in chapter 6, beginning at verse 1, then Darius the king made a decree, and search was made in the house of the rolls where the treasures were laid up in Babylon. And there was found at Achmethah in the palace that is in the province of the Medes a roll, and therein was a record thus written. In the first year of Darius, the same Darius the king made a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem. Let the house be builded, the place where they offered sacrifice. Let the foundations thereof be strongly laid, the height thereof 80 cubits, the breadth thereof 80 cubits, with 3 rows of great stones and a row of new timber, and let the expenses be given out of the king's house. And also let the golden and silver vessels of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took forth out of the temple which is at Jerusalem, and brought to Babylon, be restored, and brought again to the temple which is at Jerusalem, everyone to his place, and place them in the house of God. Now therefore, Tatnai, governor beyond the river, Shethar-boznai, and your companions, the Apharsachites, which are beyond the river, be ye far from thence. Let the work of this house of God alone. All right, so they did the search, and sure enough, they found out that Cyrus had made such a decree, and everything that the Jews were saying was true. Now, there's a question asked, how was this search different from the search that we talked about last week? You know, initially these opponents of the construction had sent back and said, you know, this is a really troublemaking people. And they won't pay their taxes, and they're very rebellious sort of folks. And you should not let them build this temple. If you'll search your records, you'll find out that these people have been a very rebellious lot of people. They did that search, and they in fact did find out that Jerusalem had been a city of rebelliousness against any outside forces. That was true. The fact of the matter is that was true. But their search in that sense was just to, what kind of trouble have these people caused in the past? And they found record of the fact that these people had been a troublemaking people in the past. Stop the temple. This search was different. This search was more specific. This search was find out if Cyrus did in fact issue a decree that this temple should be built and that the temple vessels should be returned. Find out. And so this was a far narrower search. This was a search for a single authorization that had been given by Cyrus. And when they looked for it, they in fact found that it was true. So I think that's the difference in the two searches. They were looking for things generally in the first search, and they were looking for one thing specifically in the second search. And they found out that such a decree had in fact been issued by Cyrus. Now, our author asks us, and I think it's an interesting thing to bring out, what was the rule if a decree was made by a Persian king? What was the aftermath, I guess you would say, of a decree being made by a Persian king? Well, go to the book of Daniel. You know this story very well. You can't change it. Once it's been issued, you can't take it back, right? Remember in Daniel chapter 6, Daniel chapter 6 is Daniel in the lion's den, right? So, Daniel, who was a strong and faithful servant of God, was also a very high-ranking political figure in Babylon. In Babylon. But after the Persians had conquered the Babylonians, he was elevated even. He was a powerful statesman under the Babylonians. When the Persians conquered the Babylonians, they saw the advantage of his work, and the Persians also made him a high-ranking officer. And he had some political enemies. There were some people who were jealous of him. But they knew that he never did anything wrong. He never was disloyal or unfaithful to his duties to the king. And they figured out the only way we're going to entrap him is if we put him in a bind between obeying the king and obeying his God, because we know he'll obey his God. And so they really duped the king into making an order that you couldn't pray to anybody but the king for 30 days. That for 30 days, all your prayers must be directed to the king. Remember, a lot of those monarchs back in those times actually claimed deity for themselves effectively. We know even the Roman Caesars did that. So you can't pray to anybody but you, king. And the king was duped into issuing that order. And then what happened? Of course, the guys who talked him into doing that knew what would happen. Daniel would keep praying to his God. And they found Daniel praying to his God. And the order was anybody thus found praying to someone other than the king is to be cast into a den of lions. And so now the king is stuck because he likes Daniel. He likes Daniel a lot. But he has issued this decree. Look in Daniel 6, verse, let's see, verse 12. Verse 11. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. Then they came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Then answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men assembled unto the king and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king establisheth may be changed. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. So here was a case where the Persian king wanted to change the rule, the decree that he had issued, because he favored Daniel. He liked Daniel. And he realized that these guys had entrapped him. Those guys, by the way, are going to end up paying with their lives. They're going to get cast into the den of lions when this story ends. But he can't change the rule. The rule is the rule, and the rule can't be changed. All right, so that's the same kind of a regime that we're under here in the case of the Jews returning to Jerusalem. Cyrus, the Persian king Cyrus, issued a decree that the temple should be built. That being the case, that decree cannot be rescinded or changed. And this current king realizes that that is so and says, okay, we found the decree. What they're claiming is true. And therefore, we are ordering you, Tatnai, and this other Shethar-Boznai, and your companions, be ye far from thence. Let the work of the house of God alone. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews build this house of God in his place. So their attempts to get the king to stop the work backfire this time. And they're actually told to stand down, get out of the way. And in fact, he goes even further. He says, verse 8, Moreover, I make a decree that ye shall do to the elders of these Jews for the building of the house of God, that the king's goods, even the tribute beyond the river, forthwith expenses, be given unto these men, that they be not hindered, and that which they have need of, both young bullocks and rams and lambs for the burnt offerings of God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, and oil, according to the appointment of the priests which are at Jerusalem, let it be given them day by day without fail, that they may offer sacrifices of sweet savors unto God of heaven, and pray for the life of the king and his sons. I have also made a decree that whosoever shall alter this word, let timber be pulled down from his house, and being set up, let him be hanged thereon, and let his house be made a dunghill for this. And the God that hath caused his name to dwell there, destroy all kings and peoples that put to their hand to alter and to destroy this house of God which is at Jerusalem. I, Darius, have made a decree, let it be done with speed. So, again, not only were they successful, not only were they not successful in stopping the work, now they even have to help carry it out and get it done by way of financing and providing provisions for all this work. And if anybody who tries to stop this, you go to his house and you pull down the timbers of his house and you erect a gallows and you hang him on that. And you make his house into a dung heap. And I'm telling you, don't get in the way of this. It is my decree. So that's pretty powerful words. And they, again, the opponents of this work are really stymied now. They didn't get what they want, and they got the exact opposite of that. Notice there in chapter 6, verse 3, that the dimensions of this temple that are to be built, Let the house be built, the place where they offered sacrifice, let it be foundations thereof be strongly laid, the height thereof 80 cubits, the breadth thereof 80 cubits. So 30 cubits by 30 cubits. The author asked, how did those dimensions compare with the original temple? Actually, it's just slightly bigger. The original temple was 30 by 20 cubits. This one is 30 by 30 cubits. But if you stop to think about it, that's not enormously big. In the case of the original temple, 30 cubits by 20 cubits, and a Jewish cubit or a Hebrew cubit was about 18 inches. And so that's 45 feet by 30 feet. That's not an enormously big building. I didn't know this until just doing some recent reading. Apparently a Babylonian cubit was different than a Hebrew cubit. And a Babylonian cubit was actually 21 inches. So it was a little longer than a Hebrew cubit. And if that's how they measured, then the building that they're building is actually like 52.5 feet by 52.5 feet. So it was a little bit bigger than the original temple was. What would be the reason for that, I do not know, but it was just slightly bigger. Still not a very huge building, but of course, in the case of Solomon's temple, it was so elaborately ordained, it was amazing. This temple, even from the very laying of the foundations, it compared badly to the first one. Look again at Haggai, in Haggai chapter 2. Haggai chapter 2, verse 3. Haggai says, "Who is left among you that saw this house in her first glory? And how do you see it now? Is it not in your eyes in comparison of it as nothing?" And so Haggai acknowledges that the temple that's being built there is not even closely in comparison to the magnificence of the one that Solomon built that Nebuchadnezzar tore down. But he's going to make a prophecy about what will happen at this place in a minute. We'll read this in a minute. But again, the dimensions are similar. This one, the foundations of this one are slightly larger, but it's just not going to be as special as Solomon's temple was, not anyway close. So when the temple was completed, verse 13, keep reading, chapter 6, verse 13. Then Tatnai, governor of this side of the river, and Shetharboznai, and their companions, according to that which Darius the king had sent, so they did speedily. They knew they better step to it, and they did. And the elders of the Jews built it, and they prospered through the prophecy of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. And they built it and finished it according to the commandment of the God of Israel and according to the commandment of Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month Adar, which is in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. So it was in the 2nd year when they started back, and notice it's in the 6th year when they finish it. And by most accounts, that was going to line up with the year 516 or 515 BC is when they got the house built. And then, of course, they dedicated it. Verse 16, the children of Israel, the priests and the Levites and the rest of the children of the captivity kept the dedication of this house of God with joy and offered at the dedication of this house of God 100 bullocks, 200 rams, 400 lambs, and for a sin offering all of Israel 12 he-goats according to the number of the tribes of Israel. And they set the priests in their divisions and the Levites in their courses for the service of God, which is at Jerusalem, as it is written in the book of Moses. And the children of the captivity kept the Passover upon the 14th day of the first month. For the priests and Levites were purified together. All of them were pure and killed the Passover for all the children of the captivity and for their brethren the priests and for themselves. And the children of Israel, which were come again out of captivity, and all such as had separated themselves unto them from the filthiness of the heathen of the land, to seek the Lord God of Israel, did eat and kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with joy. For the Lord had made them joyful and turned the heart of the king of Assyria unto them to strengthen their hand in the work, the house of God, the God of Israel. I think that, I didn't even think to look about that, but the heart of the king of Assyria. That probably should be the king of Persia. I don't know if other versions changed that or not. I didn't think to look that up. But Assyria is gone at this point. And Assyria was taken by the Babylonians taken by the Persians. And so this is a Persian king who strengthened their hands in the work of the house of God of Israel. Again, the comparison of these two temples is not a good comparison. And the people who knew what the first temple looked like certainly were discouraged in some degree. And so go back with me to Haggai a minute. We're just about out of time, but go back with me to Haggai 2. So he said, we read this a minute ago, who is left among you that saw this house in her first glory? How do you see it now? Is it not in your eyes in comparison of it as nothing? Now, how old would those people? They would have been some old men, right? Because they had to have been old enough when they were taken into captivity to have seen the temple and had a remembrance of it. So that was Solomon's temple, right? Again, it had been robbed quite a bit before Nebuchadnezzar finally tore it down. But it was still a grand and magnificent structure and amazingly ornated. And even a young child would have seen it and been impressed by it. So they were 70 years in the captivity. So we think the 70-year captivity started in 606, but we believe the temple was torn down in 586. This is 516 probably. So there was a 70-year captivity, but when it ended in about 536, now they've been 20 years in getting to this point of the temple construction. This is about 516. So if these were if the people who were alive, they would have been young children in 586. The last of the captives taken away who saw the temple and maybe even witnessed it being torn down. This is 70 years later. So they've got to be probably 80 or 80 plus years old. And so it's just the very oldest ones of the returning exiles who could make that mental comparison of this temple to the other. And Haggai acknowledges those people and said, is it not in your eyes in comparison of it as nothing? But notice what Haggai goes on to say. And this is Haggai 2 verse 4. Yet now be strong, O Zerubbabel, saith the Lord, and be strong, Joshua the son of Josedech, the high priest, and be strong, all ye people of the land, saith the Lord, and work. For I am with you, saith the Lord of hosts. According to the word that I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt, so my spirit remaineth among you. Fear ye not. For thus saith the Lord of hosts, yet once it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land, and I will shake the nations, and the desire of all nations shall come, and I will fill this house with glory, saith the Lord of hosts. The silver is mine, the gold is mine, saith the Lord of hosts. The glory of this latter house shall be greater than the former, saith the Lord of hosts. And in this place I will give peace, saith the Lord of hosts. So here's a really interesting prophecy by Haggai. This house is actually going to be grander than the one it replaced. Well, it wasn't physically so, right? Physically, it never held a candle to the magnificence of Solomon's temple. But what he's talking about here is that it will be at this place and in this house where the Lord will come, where the Messiah will be identified and acknowledged. I will fill this house with glory, saith the Lord. All nations will be shook. The glory of this latter house will be greater than the former. And in this place I will give peace, saith the Lord of hosts. He's talking about the coming of the Messiah. Will take place in this temple that's being constructed here. Remember when Joseph and Mary brought Jesus at 8 days old to the temple? And Anna and Simeon acknowledged him as the promised one of God. That's this temple. And that's what Haggai was prophesying about. It won't be the same in physical appearance. It's actually, in comparison, is pretty discouraging in physical appearance. But what's going to take place in this building will far surpass anything that ever took place in the one that Solomon built. And that's what Haggai is prophesying. Any thoughts or comments? Anybody? All right. I think that's an interesting development there. At the end of it all, Haggai promises this is going to be better. In the long run, this is going to be better. Thanks, everybody. Lord willing, we'll take the next lesson from chapters 7 and 8 next week.